Protests have been breaking out across the United States in response to the deaths of 3 immigrant workers in just 7 days at the hands of federal agents. On July 7th, ICE agents and unmarked SUVs chased down Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, a 52-year-old homebuilder who lived in Houston for 35 years. As he drove his crew to a job site, he was, flagged down by these SUVs and then shot and killed. On July 13th, an ICE agent in Biddeford, Maine, shot and killed Johan Sebastián Durán Guerrero, a 26-year-old Colombian worker, a man with work authorization and a social security number, and this was right outside his own home. His wife and 3-year-old daughter were in the car when he was shot and saw his body on the ground as it laid there for 5 hours, and he was handcuffed. The very next morning in St. Augustine, Florida, a 28-year-old Mexican man was hit and killed by a tractor trailer as he was running away from federal agents at a gas station in the context of a ICE operation. So in the case of Lorenzo and Sebastián, neither were the targets of the operations that killed them. None of the agents wore body cameras, so the footage that we've seen of these incidents is purely from passerbys and onlookers who happen to be there. And, once again, we hear a government story that they weaponize their vehicles. This is, again, the same script that ICE and the federal government has been using in the context of several ICE killings, even Renee Nicole Good. And once the video emerged of these incidents, this claim kind of fell apart. The Trump administration, knows what happens when it commits these killings. In January, Minneapolis answered the killings of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy with mass general strikes. And ICE was actually forced to leave Minnesota. Now communities in Houston, in Maine, and beyond are demanding ICE out of everywhere, especially after Trump reversed the order by the DHS to stop car stops. So joining us to talk about the fight back to ICE violence against immigrant communities across the United States is Karina Garcia. She is an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation and former vice presidential candidate. Karina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rahim. Zoe, nice to see you.
Well, unfortunately, it's in this context of just absolute horror and violence. Karina, 3 people were killed in 1 week. This is, it's a horrendous figure. And in 2 of the cases, we know that they were not even the targets of the arrest warrants that ICE supposedly had. They were looking for someone else and just killed the person right in front of them. You have been working with communities across the country that are living under these operations. What are you hearing on the ground, and what do these 3 killings tell us about how, this deportation machine actually operates on a day-to-day basis?
People are pissed. People are pissed. They're sick of the double standard. They're sick of the impunity, the piggishness of these officers hunting down our people at 6 a.m. on their way to work, treating them like animals. You mentioned it. Johan Sebastián was killed in front of his wife and his 3-year-old daughter. Lorenzo had 3 sons who were all citizens. Not that should even matter at all in terms of the injustice that was committed against his family. But all of this brutality was predictable. All of it was preventable. And it's the consequence of the president launching an open war on immigrant families. But it's important that even while we talk about the White House and their responsibility, that we don't forget about the other 2 branches, because they each had a role in these murders too. For decades, both parties have been playing up this war on immigrants to distract from their inability to address any of the myriad economic problems facing working families in this country. They've used immigrants as punching bags over and over again to divide people, to distract from all of their unnecessary, expensive, and endless wars. People are drowning in debt in this country, and they don't even make the rich pay taxes. These bastards don't even contribute to the country that's making them rich. And now that the people all over the country are seeing through this BS, they're pointing fingers at each other, and they're pointing fingers at the public themselves. The arrogance. Congress has power. They have the power of the purse. ICE pulled the trigger because Congress gave them the guns. They approved billions more in funding for a criminal organization when they knew damn well what could happen. So every politician who voted for ICE funding is also responsible for these deaths. The Supreme Court is responsible for these deaths. The Supreme Court ruled last year that ICE could in fact seize people in their vehicles without a warrant. They ruled that not only racial profiling, but class profiling could in fact be the basis for so-called reasonable suspicion. And these are the very kind of stops that have led to these murders that we're seeing right now. These things were being challenged by progressive attorneys as unconstitutional already, but the Supreme Court stepped in to say that ICE could do this. So if you ask me, all three branches of government killed Lorenzo and Johan, just like they killed Jaime Alanis, just like they killed Renee Nicole Good, just like they killed Alex Preddy and Keith Porter. The whole system is guilty. The whole system has to be replaced, because we can see how all three branches of government, they've made these injustices. They defend them. And in fact, they even ratify them.
Well, that's very well said. And I want to, point out, after the Maine shooting, we did see that DHS announced it was pausing most traffic stops and then promised body cameras. Of course, they keep promising body cameras. Not that that's a fix either way. But then within about a day, we saw Trump personally overturn that pause. I mean, and Holman himself called it a temporary pause rather than like a policy change. But, what do you think that whiplash tells us about whether there's any, appetite in this administration for restraint, about whether this administration is maybe worried about another uprising, and also about whether this agency of ICE can be reformed at all? I mean, we're hearing it being mainstream, the idea of abolish ICE.
Well, like you said, Rania, the call for body cams is BS. Renee Nicole Good, Alex Preddy, those were two U.S. citizens that were killed. The whole world saw those deaths for multiple angles. They were killed for protesting, for using their First Amendment right to protest these terrorist agencies. The whole world saw it, and no one is in jail for these murders. We've seen time and time again in the police brutality cases. And the fact is that the great advance of those mass movements against racism and police violence in 2020 is that people started to recognize and understand that these murders weren't just individual cases, that there's not just about a few bad apples, that these are in fact systemic, that this is the consequence of a racist system that in fact targets and criminalizes Black men in particular, but Black people in general. And at the same time, it starves these communities and disenfranchises people, Black people, working class people, putting them against each other. We don't need body cameras to regulate ICE because ICE shouldn't exist at all. Immigration is a civil matter. It's not a criminal one. We shouldn't have an armed, racist, paramilitary force granted apparent impunity roaming our streets to begin with. That's why our movement calls for the abolition of ICE, not its reforms. And I want to be clear that before ICE existed, this capitalist state was already killing immigrant workers and targeting the undocumented. So the real answer to all of this is really equal rights. It's that simple. Equal rights and building strong working class organizations of immigrant and US-born people alike. We can't keep taking this at a surface level approach to these things, because we know that people have been killed in this last week, but it's not just the ones that were killed by a gun. How many immigrants have been killed in the detention centers because of medical neglect? How many innocent people who have died in these high-speed chases? These high-speed chases in residential streets because of ICE, and all those kids who are orphans now in broken families. ICE is now the most heavily funded federal law enforcement agency in U.S. history. They get more funding than the FBI, the DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshal Service, Bureau of Prisons, all of those combined. So they're expanding this deportation machine for years to come, but they didn't make it. That's very important. They didn't create it. So we have to meet this moment with a mass movement, because as we've seen time and time again, that is the only thing that can change the balance of forces in these struggles and to end the criminalization of our communities.
Really powerful, Karina. And you're mentioning kind of this need for a mass movement. And of course, with the Trump administration's kind of like back and forth on should we pause these vehicle stops, I mean, it clearly denotes that they're kind of waffling with their response. We know that ICE has made a shift in their strategy. They realized that the big flashy military occupations of cities were actually causing a lot of uproar and a lot of backlash. So they did move towards this kind of quieter, allegedly more subtle strategy, despite the fact that they're now, killing people in plain sight. But, it's clear that the administration is calculating because they know that there is a strong public response. In Minneapolis, we saw labor unions, clergy, immigrant rights movements, progressive organizations come together and call for the January 23rd general strike following the killing of Renee Nicole Good. Another strike called on January 30th following the killing of Alex Preddy. And immediately after, and actually between the 23rd and the 30th, Bovino was removed from Minneapolis, who was kind of the figure. Videos of him tear gassing people were going viral. And then, Operation Metro Surge was kind of quietly ended, and this federal occupation was to some extent decreased. So are we looking at a similar scenario in terms of the movement's response? We've heard there's a National Day of Action planned this weekend. Talk about kind of the fight back to us, and are we going to see kind of this mass pushback to the Trump administration's policies?
I think we are. I think we're starting to see it already. We've been seeing all over in Maine, all over in Houston. There's been solidarity marches with all of those cities. This Saturday, we're going to have a National Day of Action. The thing that makes all the difference, the change, is the mood of the people. And the clarity about who are the actual invaders. Who are the people who are endangering your communities? Is it the farm workers and the construction workers, the day laborers in your neighborhood? Or is it these rogue, mass, trigger-happy racists who think that they can do whatever they want, that they can pull people over, that they can pull them and grab them? Who are the real criminals here, right? And we know it's because they need to reach their quota, because the Trump administration has said now that they want 2,000 arrests every single day. So I think that it's showing people in real time, who the real enemy is, who is the threat, and that we have to do something to protect our cities, that no one is coming to save us, just like they learned in Minneapolis, that nobody was coming to save them, so they saved themselves. And that's what's happening right now too.
Mm. I do want to ask you in regard to all of that, in Maine, we saw protesters literally shooing Governor Janet Mills away from Sebastian's memorial, and Democrats are holding press conferences and demanding investigations. But, you said both parties are complicit here. This is the same party that helped hand ICE tens of billions of dollars. There's clearly a gap between what communities are demanding, which is ICE out entirely, and then what Democratic officials are willing to offer. So how does this movement navigate that? In other words, using these officials where they're, I guess, useful, without letting the energy get funneled into, strongly worded letters, or the Democratic Party machine itself, which we know is where movements go to die.
We have to be learning the lessons of our actual movement. The people are not here to explain away or make excuses for the politicians. No, they need to be explaining themselves. I was an activist in 2006 when the mass immigrant rights movement launched. There was a day without an immigrant. And in 2006, it's so similar to what's happening right now. But now we have the lessons of 2006 that we don't have to start all over again. What happened when there was a day without an immigrant strike that took over nationwide is that there were Democratic politicians and organizations that act as their cheerleaders, who were telling the people that, well, today we march, tomorrow we vote. And again, it was a midterm year. So it was all about the elections. And so that kind of to push the people away. But it was actually the mass movement itself, the fact that people were mobilizing all around the country, that is what actually stopped the anti-immigrant legislation. They stopped that anti-immigrant legislation, but the reason that everything turned around and that, at that moment, they were pushed back so hard that everybody started talking about comprehensive immigration reform. And it was amnesty. People were in the streets saying full rights for all immigrants, amnesty now. That was the call of the movement. But by going back and focusing only on the midterm elections, on who's getting elected, Well, the Democrats were elected, and what did they do? Did they pass comprehensive immigration reform? They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. So we can't fall victim to the same thing, putting our hopes and aspirations in them. We can't. We have to stay in the streets in the ways that actually change the correlation of forces, to force our initiatives to become real, that we need full rights for all immigrants, that we can't continue to have a second class of people who can be mistreated and super exploited, that they are part of the working class. And in fact, the working class is an international class. To the extent that we allow ourselves to be divided is to the extent that all of our living conditions suffer. So we need full rights for all immigrants. Those are our demands. Nothing in between. And those are the things that we have to fight for. It's not about being the backdrop to these opportunistic politicians. We don't need them to tell us how bad ICE is. We know how bad ICE is. What we need them to do is take some action and stop funding these criminals. And so that's what we have to do. We have to remember our own power and not give it away, but to actually realize its potential.
No, and a really important message. And before we let you go, Karina, because wow, I am fired up. But we know, yeah, Karina Garcia, shout out. But this, you alluded to this, this Trump crackdown that was, of course, something that the Democrats had been doing, but really intensified beginning in January 2025, has gone beyond the U.S. borders. We know that there were 250 Venezuelan migrants who were deported to El Salvador through a partnership between Trump and Bukele. This became a major kind of element in negotiations between Venezuela and Washington. Venezuela had to fight in negotiations to actually get the repatriation of their citizens from a torture confined detention center in El Salvador. Now Mexico is pursuing legal action over the death of 17 of its nationals, again, of people who have died in ICE custody. Colombia's president has also demanded accountability, given that Johan Sebastián Guerrero is a Colombian citizen who had, again, work authorization. This is, in a lot of ways, becoming an international indictment of the United States, in addition to kind of the uproar it's creating domestically. So can you talk a bit about this international response? And afterwards, we're going to talk about kind of what are the next steps. But first, yeah.
Well, I think it's important internationally for, obviously, the Mexican government to be in solidarity with the Mexican nationals and to use every single kind of power that they have to put a hold on these people and to expose this criminal empire for what it is. But nobody anywhere else in the world is going to save us but ourselves. So ultimately, while it's important for leaders in Latin America to speak up and to defend the sovereignty of their nations and to defend the dignity of their peoples wherever they are, the people who are going to fight are the people in the United States. The people who are going to turn the tide on Trump are the people of the United States. So ultimately, it always comes back to us and whether we're going to do what we need to do to take back our country.
And on that note, what are people doing in these coming days, and how can people get involved in all of this that you're talking about?
Well, I think that there's not going to be like a one-size approach to all the different tactics and questions about how to organize, but it's very important that this Saturday, right now in the heat of it, when we're seeing and so many people are angry about what's happening, that there is going to be a national day of action. And we know how important national days of action are in the movement for Palestine, and even as you mentioned in Minneapolis, to stop them, to put them back in their place, to prevent them from continuing to harass our people. So we know that this movement is going to be more than just a day of action, but it's also important for us and for the people to feel their power in these days of action, that we can do many days of action and that everything we do leading up to those days of action is so important, because the only way to stop an organized force is to build an even bigger organized force. And there's no force that is greater or stronger than the force of the working class. So that's our task, is to organize our people. And I think, in Minnesota, there was a mass network of neighbors that formed to counter ISIS invasion. They showed up by mobilizing the people, with citizens especially standing up. We can see that our power is so much greater than even the largest deployment of ICE in history. that the grassroots participation really set the foundation for the general strike and shutdown then. So that's a model that shows what can be accomplished. But that was also in response to an invasion that everyone could see out of their windows. And in some cities, it's going to feel like that. And in some cities, it's not. You can't manufacture that. In some areas, the main tactic might be to accompany immigrants to court. In others, it could be to form committees in schools between parents and teachers and community members to make the school a sanctuary. It might be to go out and to film ICE. But the most important thing is that you figure out what to do, first and foremost, by joining organizations where people can collectively discuss what needs to be done, what's possible in our city, and how to draw in more people. That's the most important thing. Organization is the key, not this or that tactic, because by bringing people together, you can transcend your conception of what you can do as an individual. And no matter where we are, the truth is that there's no local solution to what is a national emergency. This is a national political crisis. It's an illusion to think that we can keep immigrants and their supporters safe anywhere without a strong national movement. But there needs to be a national movement for full rights. And it has to be to end the state of precariousness, the vulnerability once and for all immigrants. Not this status or this, the dreamers, but not their parents, all immigrants. So no matter what our local organizations do, and it can be different, they need to be tied together by a common political vision.
Beautiful. Well, Karina Garcia, thank you so much for joining us here on BT Live. I think definitely taking a very difficult moment and hopefully people feel inspired listening to your words and feel inspired to take action. So thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you all for what you do. Thank you for having me.